My world was a symphony of lines, a precise ballet of contour and boundary. I, Reid, measured my existence in the elegant sweep of a river's forgotten course, the meticulous crosshatching of a surveyed mountain range, the faded, authoritative script of a long-vanished border. A historical cartographer, I found solace in the immutable order of geography, in the certainty that every point had its coordinate, every feature its place. My tools were not for creation, but for revelation, magnifying lenses, fine-tipped pens, and the patient, discerning eye that could resurrect vanished landscapes from the ghosts of old vellum. Then came the solicitor's terse letter, a stark black smudge on creamy paper, severing my neat, predictable world. An inheritance, it stated. An ancestral estate, long dormant, now mine. Remote, it warned. Decaying, it implied. The words themselves felt like a crude erasure on my carefully drawn life. The journey was a slow unraveling, each mile deeper into a forgotten corner of the coast, each turn of the carriage wheel a further separation from the known world. The driver, a taciturn man whose eyes held the weary resignation of one too familiar with these isolated roads, offered no commentary, only the occasional, unsettling glance in the rear-view mirror. Finally, the carriage groaned, spitting gravel as it turned onto an overgrown drive, and there it was. The estate. It sagged, a skeletal behemoth against the bruised twilight, its gabled roofline a jagged silhouette against a sky the color of old bruises. Generations of neglect had woven a shroud of ivy and encroaching wildness around its stone bones. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, a briny whisper of forgotten tides and slow rot. A chill, damp and persistent, seeped into my very bones, despite the heavy wool of my coat. I stepped out, the carriage door groaning shut behind me, a sound of finality. Inside, the house was a cavern of echoes and dust. Every step on the warped floorboards sent motes dancing in the meager light filtering through grimy windows. The furniture, draped in white sheets like slumbering giants, exhaled the musty breath of ages. My purpose, I reminded myself, was not to mourn the past, but to organize it, to chart its physical remnants. I had come seeking order, even in this chaos. Days blurred into a methodical excavation of the estate's detritus. Rooms yielded their secrets reluctantly, moth-eaten tapestries, brittle books whose pages crumbled at a touch, portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow my every move with a disquieting intensity. My hands, accustomed to the delicate handling of ancient manuscripts, grew calloused from wrestling open stuck drawers and prying apart fused pages. It was in the deepest recesses of a forgotten study, beneath a stack of brittle ledgers bound in tarnished brass, that I found it. The anomaly. It wasn't merely old, it felt ancient, its vellum skin cured to the texture of dried human flesh, impossibly thin yet resilient. The parchment, yellowed and brittle, bore the faint, ghost-like scent of something long forgotten, not just dust, but something earthy, mineral, like damp stone. I laid it carefully on the dusty mahogany desk, my fingers tracing its edges. The map depicted the estate and its immediate surroundings with an almost obsessive degree of detail. Every gnarled oak, every meandering stream, every dip and rise of the land was rendered with an excruciating precision that bordered on the fanatical. The ink was a pigment I couldn't immediately identify, a deep, almost iridescent black that bled into the fibers with a disquieting permanence, as if stained there by some vital fluid. But it was the symbols that truly arrested me. They weren't cartographic. They were something else entirely, glyphs unlike any I had ever encountered in my extensive study of historical iconography. Strange, angular designs, some resembling twisted roots, others like fractured bones, seemed to writhe even in their stillness, etched into the vellum at points of interest. A cluster of standing stones I hadn't yet seen. A barely discernible depression in the earth near the North Woods, a specific, unmarked point along the desolate stretch of the ocean shore at night with stationary waves. These were not landmarks, they were warnings, or perhaps invocations. And then, the incompleteness. For all its meticulous, almost maniacal detail, the map ended abruptly. A jagged tear, not from age but from a deliberate, violent rending, sliced across a crucial section of the property, leaving a significant quadrant blank. My professional curiosity, a keen, analytical instrument, was instantly engaged. This wasn't merely an old map, it was a riddle, a challenge to my very understanding of cartography. Who had made it? Why such detail, such strange symbols? And what could have been so important, so unsettling, that it had to be torn away? It was a premonition, a subtle tremor in the orderly landscape of my mind. The map demanded completion. It beckoned with its missing pieces, its unsettling glyphs hinting at a story buried beneath the land itself. I felt a pull, an almost physical compulsion, to understand its secrets, to chart its missing quadrant. My precise, ordered world had just found its terrifying new frontier. My compass, usually a faithful arbiter of truth, trembled in my hand, a nervous hummingbird against the broad expanse of the estate. The antique map, brittle as autumn leaves, lay unfurled on a portable table, its parchment skin a canvas of faded ink and meticulous cross-hatching. This was my inheritance, not merely land, but a challenge to my very craft. My fingers, accustomed to the smooth glide of a drafting pen, traced the hand-drawn contours, the minute details of an estate that refused to conform to modern survey. I began my verification at the northernmost boundary, a dense thicket of gnarled oaks that clawed at the sky. The map showed a clear, straight line here, a defined edge. What I found was a serpentine tangle, branches like petrified serpents. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the ground beneath my boots, a vibration I attributed to the distant rumble of the sea, yet it felt too close, too internal. I consulted my GPS, then the map again. I pushed through the undergrowth, the air growing thick and heavy, laden with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and cold, like rusted iron left out in the rain for a century. The sun, though high, seemed to shrink here, its light absorbed by the abnormally deep shadows that clung to the ancient trees, pooling at their roots like dark, stagnant water. It felt as though I had stepped into a refrigerator, a stark, localized drop in temperature that vanished as abruptly as it appeared, leaving me shivering. The overgrown structure the map hinted at materialized from the gloom. It was a low, squat building of rough-hewn stone, half buried in the earth, its roof collapsed inward like a broken ribcage. No record of it existed in any deed, any modern survey. Its stones were not mortared but dry-stacked, fitted with an ancient, almost primitive precision. Moss, thick as fur, coated its surfaces, and from within its gaping maw, a peculiar sound emanated, a low, sustained hum, like a forgotten hive, or the distant thrum of heavy machinery, yet it carried no echo of industry. It was a sound that seemed to resonate not in my ears, but in the very bones of my skull. I spent the next few days systematically exploring the property, each step deepening the chasm between my cartographer's certainty and the estate's unsettling reality. Everywhere, the old map presented a landscape subtly, disturbingly different. I discovered a series of stone markers, not property boundaries, but rough, uncarved monoliths, placed at seemingly arbitrary points across the rolling hills. They were too large to be casual, too uniform to be natural. Each stood roughly 7 feet tall, weathered by centuries, yet they radiated an odd, quiet presence. They did not align with any known ley lines, nor did they form any recognizable pattern I could discern, yet their placement felt deliberate, weighted with an unspoken intent. The air was heavy with salt and the metallic tang I'd grown to associate with the estate. The moon, a sliver of bone, cast a weak, fractured light across the water. Here, the ocean's surface was a mirror of polished obsidian, unnaturally still. The waves, usually a restless symphony of crash and retreat, were frozen in place, their white caps like petrified foam, suspended in an impossible stasis. Only a faint, almost imperceptible vibration, the same internal thrum I felt on the estate, resonated up through the sand, a silent, insistent beat beneath the unnerving stillness. My cartographer's mind, so accustomed to the predictable flows and ebbs of the natural world, struggled to categorize this anomaly. The estate was not merely old, it was wrong. And the map, my precise, beautiful map, was not just incomplete, it was a key to a door I now feared to open. This was my inheritance, and it was no longer merely a cartographic puzzle, it was a living, breathing enigma, its pulse beating faintly beneath my fingertips. A flicker in the periphery, a deepening of the already profound twilight that clung to the edges of the manor's vast rooms. I'd turn, convinced I'd caught a glimpse of movement, but the space would be empty, save for the dust motes dancing in the last slivers of light. My eyes, trained to discern the most minute discrepancies on aged paper, found only the familiar geometry of antique furniture. Then came the whispers. Not words, not quite, but a sibilant rustle, like dry leaves skittering across distant stone, or the breath of something immensely old sighing through the very fabric of the walls. It would rise and fall, a low thrum against the silence, always just beyond the threshold of understanding. I blamed the wind, the creaks of settling timber, the isolation of this forgotten place. My logical mind, a fortress built of reason and empirical data, stood firm against these phantom intrusions. But the objects. They were harder to dismiss. A quill I'd left on the edge of my desk would be found nestled in the inkwell. A volume of regional histories, its spine cracked with age, would lie open on a different page than I remembered. A chair, painstakingly aligned with the compass points of the room, would be subtly angled, its legs shifted a fraction of an inch. Each instance was minor, easily rationalized as my own absent-mindedness, yet their accumulation began to chip away at the mortar of my certainty. Sleep offered no refuge. My nights became a churning canvas of vivid, unsettling nightmares. The dreams felt less like subconscious projections and more like stolen glimpses through a fractured pane of glass, revealing a truth I wasn't ready to face. The map, however, became the most potent catalyst of my eroding sanity. I would leave it carefully unfurled under the lamplight, its details memorized, its blank spaces charted in my mind. Yet, upon returning, I'd find subtle alterations. A contour line, once faint, would now possess an unsettling depth, almost like a raised scar on the parchment's surface. A cluster of trees, rendered in delicate crosshatching, would seem to have shifted, their canopy expanding to obscure a previously visible landmark. Most disturbingly, in the section marking the furthest reaches of the property, the wild, untamed coastal edge, a new pattern began to emerge. It wasn't drawn, it simply appeared, its ink somehow fresher, wetter, than the centuries-old lines surrounding it. My meticulous notes, my precise measurements, all screamed against the impossibility of these changes. Yet, there they were. The map was no longer a static historical document, it was a living thing, breathing, shifting, beckoning. The spiral pattern on the coastal section pulsed with an undeniable energy, a silent command that resonated deep within my bones. My determination, once fixed on completing a cartographic puzzle, now morphed into an urgent, desperate need to understand the maps. Terrible truth. The moon, a sliver of bone in a sky bruised with purple, hung low as I made my way to the estate's edge. The path, overgrown and treacherous, led me down a steep incline, the map clutched in my trembling hand, its new markings glowing faintly, almost phosphorescent, in the gloom. Finally, I stood on the ocean shore at night with stationary waves. The sight alone was enough to make my breath catch in my throat. The vast expanse of the sea, usually a restless churn of foam and thunder, lay utterly still. The waves, frozen in mid-curl, stretched out like an endless, polished obsidian mirror, reflecting the bruised sky above. It wasn't a rock or a wreck. It was too regular, too symmetrical. A structure, ancient and unnatural, its weathered stone barely breaking the surface. As I stared, a tremor ran through the frozen waves, not of water, but of something immense shifting beneath. It wasn't spoken with a tongue or throat, but resonated directly within my mind, a chorus of countless, suffering echoes. He is here. The blood returns. The vessel is ready. The words were not in English, yet their meaning was instantly, horrifyingly clear. It was a demand, an ancient pact, awakened by my presence, my lineage. The structure in the water pulsed, and for a fleeting, unbearable moment, I saw not stone, but a colossal, skeletal hand, its fingers reaching, grasping. It wasn't asking for something from me, it was asking for me. The map slipped from my fingers, falling onto the damp sand, the spiral now glowing with an internal, malevolent fire. I understood then. The entity wasn't buried beneath the land, it was the land, or at least, inextricably bound to it, a vast, patient horror that had waited for generations. And the sacrifice. It wasn't a ritual offering I could perform. It was a lineage, a life, a mind to be subsumed, to become part of its unending hunger. My madness wasn't a symptom, it was the process of my assimilation, the slow, agonizing surrender. I was no longer Reid, the meticulous cartographer. I was merely the next in line, the final piece in a terrifying, ancient design.